Good Shabbos! Good Shabbos! Good Shabbos! Stop. My holy sisters and brothers, how are you? Of course, that was the Moshav band doing their version of Mizmor LeDavid. It's a psalm that we sing as part of the Kabbalah Shabbos liturgy. Can't wait to do it tonight with my Carlebach Minyan in our backyard Minyan. Today, I'm not going to forget to light up the darkness like I did yesterday until I was reminded. How are you? Are you guys excited for Shabbos? Can't come soon enough. Who is with us as we get it going on a Friday afternoon? James Roth saying Shabbat Shalom. Randy in Florida. Yehudit in South Carolina. Harold in Pebble Beach. I wish I was with you. Tom Beck saying Good Shabbos. Melissa in snowy New York. Snow, snow, snow everywhere. Just shared a picture of the snow in Jerusalem with a line from Psalm 147. What does God do? He lays down snow like fleece, scatters frost like ashes. That's actually in the daily prayer book. Who else is with us? Billy in Virginia, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Paula in the Great Northwest, Renee in Indy, Chaim in Charlotte, Lisa says Good Shabbos, Renee says Good Shabbos, Nancy in North Carolina, Ann says Shabbat Shalom, Miriam in Hayden, Colorado, Caroline in Raleigh, Pauline in Arkansas, Brinna saying thank God it's Shabbos, Ari in Atlanta, Erin saying Shabbat Shalom to everyone, Diane in Maryland. Welcome, everybody. Lynn in Texas says Shabbat Shalom from North Texas. Power is back on next water. Right, folks? I mean, we take it for granted that drinkable water comes out of our faucet. They took it for granted in Texas. Now they can't take it for granted. We pray that everyone caught in the path of this storm has power, has warmth, has drinkable water, has everything they need, and that the storm passes. And we say, Amen, Amen, Amen. Before I get into today's daf, it's just worth mentioning that this is Shabbos Zahor. This is one of the special Shabbats that we observe in the weeks leading eventually to Pesach. Next week is Purim, but we've already started that countdown to Passover. So Shabbos Zahor, we're going to read in the Maftir Torah reading, the last part of the Torah that's read aloud in Shabbos in synagogues tomorrow. Is this passage with regard to Amalek, right? So who was Amalek? Amalek was a nation led originally by a king, but they really absorbed the very negative qualities of their leader. And when the children of Israel left Egypt, the Lord took us out. He unleashed the 10 plagues. He parted the sea. He revealed God's self there at Mount Sinai. And the whole world sensed that something incredible was going on. But the only nation that didn't only, not respect what was going on, but sought to undermine it in any way possible. And knowing that, okay, so, this nation that's just come out of Egypt, they clearly have some very powerful defender in heaven. So we're not going to take them on head on the battlefield. But if we could just pick off a few of the weak ones in back, the elderly, the children, the defenseless, the most vulnerable, well, then we'll show that this Jewish people isn't absolutely invulnerable. And that's what they did. Amalek attacked the most vulnerable of the children of Israel in the back. God did not like it. God did not like it. This was a quality in that nation of Amalek that absolutely angered God. And God said that is a nation that must be wiped out. They have no redeeming qualities. And it was actually a commandment to the children of Israel to wipe out Amalek, to wipe out that nation. And then the bizarre, the so counterintuitive commandment, and it's a mitzvah, to erase the memory of Amalek from this world, do not forget. Right? So, I mean, no one would have heard of Amalek. Their memory would be wiped out, except that we're commanded to remember this and to say it aloud in synagogue, to remember to obliterate the memory. I mean, what does it mean? It's such a contradiction. If we didn't talk about it, Amalek would be gone from memory. That nation is long ago wiped out. They don't have any living descendants. So what does it mean that we have to remember to wipe them out? Often, this commandment is interpreted spiritually to say that, well, actually, there is Amalek in the world. There's Amalek in all of us. Right? It's that nasty, evil impulse that says, well, a lot of people are trying to do a good thing in this world, but they're going to fail, so I don't have to get off my butt and help them. They're just going to fail. I can just, point to a few little weaknesses in whatever good project they're going to do, and then I can say, it's not going to work. I don't have to get off my butt and help. That's an Amalek impulse. Some would go further and say, no. I mean, it's true evil, the kind of evil people in the world who take advantage of the vulnerable and kill or wound them, engage in violence, etc. That's the vestige of Amalek. And since it's always going to be around, that kind of evil, at least until Mashiach comes, we have to fight against it. We have to be prepared to get off our butts and fight against it. That's another interpretation of Amalek. But I just read last night a very interesting one from Rav Elchanan Samet, which I shared a little bit on the page earlier today. Not my typical very positive Good Shabbos message, but this is Shabbos Tahor. This is what we have to remember on this Shabbos. And he said that we got to understand this mitzvah, this commandment, as it was originally given. As it was originally given, it was essentially a genocide. Right? It is commanded to wipe out this nation of Amalek. They have no redeeming features in them. He then explains back then that was like a pretty common practice. That there were certain wars where one side, if they won, would eradicate the other. What God said to the Jewish people is only Amalek. There's also a little bit, kind of a weaker version of this about the 7 Canaanite nations that were engaged in child sacrifice and other abominable practices. They also had to be wiped out, but they weren't wiped out. There were Canaanite slaves afterwards, so that was definitely a different thing. But it was only Amalek, wipe out, destroy all these people. If you show mercy on them, that itself is a transgression. Only Amalek. Right? So we learned from that we only would engage in such a practice with Amalek, and it was successful long, long ago. The second part of the mitzvah is to remember to forget, as it were. So what does that mean, to remember to forget, if we're going to take that first commandment seriously? What Rav Samet brings down, so interesting, is that according to the Rambam, Maimonides, even with respect to Amalek, the only nation in the history of mankind that God said wipe them out. And remember, God wiped out all of humanity in the flood, except for Noah and his descendants. But only Amalek since then does this commandment pertain to. But even for Amalek, says the Rambam, there is a higher command, which is that even in a war that's obligatory, even in a war where you have to go, and there are other, not whole nations, but like even an Israelite city that has completely descended into idolatry is supposed to be burned to the ground and never rebuilt, and let its mound left there as a reminder. But even with that kind of idolatrous city, even with any other nation you go to war with, you always offer peace first. Always offer peace, even to Amalek. What does peace mean? It's actually not that demanding. It's join all of humanity and accept the Noahide commandments, the 7 Noahide commandments. Accept there is a God. Don't murder, don't steal, don't tear a limb from a living animal, establish courts of law. If they would just accept the 7 Noahide commandments, which obligate all humans, then that's enough. Obviously, if they're also going to be attacking us, we're going to have a defensive war. But if they're going to accept to join all of humanity and be obligated in the Noahide laws, then that's enough. And then we don't seek to wipe them out and kill them. So what can we learn from that today? I mean, especially in such a polarized world that we live in, a polarized nation, there's so much hatred going on for people that, just disagree with other ones on ideological views. Peace between, people that you can't stand in yourself is really not that far away. You don't have to be so demanding as accept my views. It's like if you can see in that other person that they accept basic human values, then you don't have to be at war with them. So something to think about as we think about what does Shabbos Zachor mean? What does it mean to remember to forget Amalek? All right, let's get into today's daf. Here we go. We are on daf Sadi. We're on page 90 here in Tractate Pesachim, the fourth volume of the Talmud, the laws of Passover. We are in chapter 8. We're generally discussing who constitutes a group of people who have agreed to register for the Korban Pesach, for the Paschal Lamb. A group has to agree in advance that they are going to enjoy that lamb together on Passover night. Could be a young goat as well. But how do we establish that people are in that group or not in that group? These are the laws that we're examining. Today, we are going to start with the 6th Mishnah here in chapter 8. And there's some there's some concepts here that are going to get defined nicely by Rav Steinsaltz. I'll add a little bit from the art scroll. And it's about people and their liquid discharges and stuff. Let's not get hung up on the body chemistry, as it were. More important is that the sages will often spend time on the Zav and the Nida and the Zava, the people who are in this status, because the law is a little bit different for them, and therefore the sages will trace out what are the implications of being in that particular state of tuma, ritual impurity, and how it impacts whether or not the Korban Pesach, the Passover offering, can be slaughtered on their behalf. Because generally speaking, the members of the group registered to the Paschal Lamb or the Paschal Kid have to be tahor. They have to be in a state of ritual purity in order to eat of the Korban Pesach. If they're tamei, ritually impure, then they would have to wait. They are not made exempt of their obligation. They are still liable to eat of the Korban Pesach. They can't do it that night, so they would do it 30 days later at Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, which was established for people that were tamei during the first Passover. And as always, as we've been discussing for weeks, the Korban Pesach is only brought when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. Let's get into it. Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 8. A Zav, a man who experiences a gonorrheal discharge. Art Scroll just says a specific kind of discharge from the urethra. Rav Steinsaltz says is gonorrheal, who saw 2 sightings of discharge, is ritually impure. These are laws that are defined in the Torah elsewhere. To become ritually pure, tahor, and able to partake of any offerings, including the Korban Pesach, he must wait 7 clean days during which he does not see any discharge. So if he's having this kind of discharge, once it ends, he waits 7 clean days, and then he's going to be fit to finish his purification, but he hasn't finished it yet. Because then, after the 7 clean days, he immerses in a mikveh, in a ritual bath, and he will then be considered ritually pure once nightfall arrives. After immersing and before the sun sets, he's known as a tevel yom, one who has immersed that day, but he is not yet tahor. His purification process won't be complete until the sun sets on that 7th day. One slaughters the Paschal Lamb on his behalf if Erev Pesach is on his 7th day. right? So if when do we slaughter the Paschal lamb? On the afternoon before Passover night. If that afternoon coincides with this guy's 7th day of counting clean days, then even though he's not yet tahor, once the sun sets, he will be tahor because he's already immersed, and then he'll be fit to eat the Korban Pesach. So even though at the time that we would have to slaughter the lamb, which is the afternoon before Passover begins, when he is still not complete in his purification, we can slaughter it for him. We might have thought, well, he's not yet pure, so we can't slaughter for him. He can't be included in our group. The answer is yes, he can be included, because by the time nighttime arrives, when it's the time to eat the Paschal lamb, he will have completed his purification and he will be fit to eat it. As the Koran Talmud says, one slaughters the Paschal lamb on his behalf if Passover Eve is on his 7th day, despite the fact that he is not ritually pure at the time of the slaughter, since by the night of Passover he will be ritually pure and able to eat it. If he saw 3 sightings, so that's a heavier case of tuma, in which case, in addition to the 7 clean days, he must bring an offering on the 8th day to be allowed to partake of other offerings. One slaughters the Paschal lamb on his behalf if Erev Pesach coincides with his 8th day. It is presumed that by the evening, his offerings will have been brought and his purification is complete. The offerings that he needs to bring are 2 bird offerings. I think one is an ola and one is a chatas. A woman who keeps watch a day for a day is one who became ritually impure after experiencing a discharge of blood outside of her regular menses on one day or 2 consecutive days. She must then keep watch on the following day, following her last discharge, to be certain that she does not experience any additional discharges. To ritually purify herself, she should on that day immerse in a ritual bath, and on condition that she doesn't experience any discharges throughout that day, she's considered ritually pure already from the time she immersed. If she saw a discharge on one day, one slaughters the Paschal lamb on her behalf after she has immersed on her 2nd day, despite the possibility that she may see additional discharges that day. If she saw a discharge on 2 days, one slaughters the Paschal lamb on her behalf on the 3rd day. So it's the same principle as with the Zav. So the woman who is counting clean days, clean day for a flow day, meaning this is not about her regular monthly cycle. It's just seeing some spots outside of that period. So then for each day on which she saw that spotting, the next day she counts a clean day. There's a lot of nuances and particularities to this and what counts as a spot and what doesn't, outside the scope of today's conversation. The important thing is that if we have a good reason to believe that she's going to be tahor, ritually pure, by tonight, then even during the day when she's waiting, we can slaughter the lamb for her. And a zava, right? So a zav was the man who's having this gonorrheal discharge. A zava is the feminine version of that word, but it has nothing to do with gonorrhea in the case of a woman. In the case of a woman, it's a different it's a uterine discharge that has to do with blood, not with what the discharge would be in a man. And a zava is a woman who experienced discharges on 3 consecutive days. She must, like a zav, wait a full 7 clean days with no discharges, immerse in the mikveh, and then bring a sacrifice on the 8th day, and one slaughters the Paschal lamb on her behalf only on the 8th day. We move on to the Gemara, the discussion of this topic. Rav Yehuda said that Rav said, one slaughters the Paschal lamb and sprinkles from its lifeblood on behalf of one who has immersed himself during the day due to a type of ritual impurity from which he will become fully ritually pure at nightfall. If he immerses on the 14th of Nisan, that's Erev Pesach, during the day before Passover starts that night, a Paschal lamb may be offered on his behalf. And a Paschal lamb may be offered on behalf of one who is ritually impure with a type of ritual impurity that requires that he also bring an atonement offering to fully complete his purification process, even if he lacks the atonement offering. In other words, it has not yet been offered. Since he will be ritually pure and able to partake of the Paschal Paschal lamb by the evening, and the Paschal lamb may be slaughtered on his behalf. Since he will be pure in the evening, the Paschal lamb may be slaughtered on his behalf during the day. Although, at the time of the slaughter, he has not yet completed the purification process. So that's the principle. We've seen it over and over again. Now we're going to see that there's problems with the principle, or at least there's exceptions to the principle. And, this is Rav talking, and one does not slaughter the Paschal lamb and sprinkle its blood on behalf of one who is ritually impure due to contact with a sheretz, right? So a sheretz is one of those creeping animals like a lizard. If you touch it, nothing happens to you if it's alive. But if it's a dead lizard and you touch that, so then you become tamei, and then you would not be fit to join in the Paschal lamb. However, we already saw that if it has to do with a discharge, so you're tamei, but then if you immerse in the mikvah and you know that night you're going to become tahor, so we can slaughter the lamb for that person because he will be fit to eat it that night. Now, with respect to the sheretz, if you come into contact with this dead creeping thing, so you immerse in the mikvah, and then that night you're going to be tahor. You're going to be you would seemingly be fit to eat the Paschal lamb, the Pesach, that night. Why is it that with respect to this tuma of the person who touched a sheretz, we say that we don't slaughter the Paschal lamb for him, but with respect to the one who had a fluid discharge, and the sort of treatment is the same, immerse in the mikvah and wait for nightfall, for them we do slaughter the Paschal lamb. What is different about this tuma and its purification process for touching a sheretz versus the tuma and purification process for being a nida or a zava or a zav? So says Rav, we don't slaughter for that person, because although he could immerse that day and thereby ensure he will be ritually pure for that evening, nevertheless, for touching a sheretz, we don't slaughter the lamb. Ula said, one does slaughter the Paschal lamb and sprinkle its blood, even for one who is ritually impure, tamei, due to contact with a sheretz, with a dead creeping thing. The Gemara discusses the rationale behind Rav's ruling. According to Rav, what is different about one who is tamei with a type of ritual impurity such that once he has immersed himself during the day, he will become ritually pure upon nightfall, that despite presently being impure, one may offer the Paschal lamb on his behalf. It is due to the fact that he is fit to eat it by night. But why then is the Paschal lamb not offered on behalf of one who is ritually impure due to contact with the sheretz, with the creeping animal? He can also be fit to eat it by night by immersing in the ritual bath and awaiting nightfall. And the Gemara answers, no, he lacks immersion in the ritual bath. So the difference here that we're saying is, with regard to the zav or the nida, he or she has immersed in the mikvah. This one who touched the sheretz, he in order to become purified, he definitely has to immerse in the mikvah, but he hasn't done it yet. Okay, he hasn't done it yet, but we can assume that he wants to be pure, particularly since it's Erev Pesach, and tonight he wants to join his family and friends registered in a group to eat the Korban Pesach. So can't we assume that he's going to immerse? He simply hasn't done it yet. One who immersed himself during the day and will become ritually pure on nightfall lacks the setting of the sun, nightfall. So the Gemara explains a distinction. The sun sets by itself. Once they've immersed, so now they're called a tevel yom, one who immersed that day, all they have to wait for is for the sun to set and they become pure. The sun's going to set. That's something we can rely on. The sun will come up in the morning. The sun will go down at night. An asteroid could come and upset the solar system. But short of that, it's going to happen, so we can count on that. But this guy who touched the sheretz, he still has to, arrange for himself to get to the mikveh, the ritual bath, and immerse in it. He hasn't done that yet. And no human is going to be deemed so trustworthy and certain that he'll immerse that the rabbis will just say, okay, all he has to do is immerse. We're going to assume that he's going to immerse. We don't make that assumption. And the Gemara says, one who still lacks an atonement offering to complete his purification process also lacks in action, right? So you might think, so we said before that one who is the heavy Zav, right, who have had discharges for 3 days, so he needs 7 clean days and he needs to bring an offering. And we said that he hasn't brought the offering yet, but we're going to slaughter the lamb anyway. So why is it that we're not going to rely on the one who touched the sheretz but hasn't immersed yet? We're not going to assume that he's going to immerse in time, but the one who was impure, who did immerse in the mikvah, but he still has to bring an offering in order to complete his purification process, we do slaughter the lamb for him. So in other words, we're assuming that he's going to bring that offering. Why is it that we're so confident that this one guy will bring his atonement offering to complete his purification, but we're not confident that the one who touched his sheretz will immerse and thereby complete his actions needed for the purification? Why may he, nevertheless, the one who just needs to bring the atonement on his 8th day, why is it that he, nevertheless, may be registered for the Paschal lamb? And the Gemara answers, his nest, i.e. the pair of doves that he will offer as his atonement, is already in his possession. He hasn't brought the birds as an offering in the temple, but he's already purchased them, right? He's already consecrated these 2 birds to be his atonement offerings at the end of his purification process. So he has demonstrated that he's going to go through to the finish and complete his purification. He gives us a reason to be confident that he will do what he needs to do. But one who's ritually impure due to contact with the sheretz, the creeping animal, is also immediately able to become ritually pure because the ritual bath, the mikvah, is before him. All he has to do is immerse in it. He's in Jerusalem. It's Passover. A lot of people need to immerse. The mikvahs are open. It's available to him. It's not so hard to find the mikvah. Why can't we assume that he'll go to the mikvah and immerse? And the Gemara answers, the reason a Paschal lamb may not be brought on his behalf is due to the concern perhaps he will be neglectful and he will not immerse. Therefore, it cannot be assumed with certainty that by evening he will be ritually pure. If so, says the Gemara, in the case of one who still lacks an atonement offering, shouldn't there also be a concern that perhaps he will be neglectful and will not bring his offering? And the Brisa deals with a case such as one in which he has already handed over his pair of doves to the court of priests. He not only bought the doves, he already handed them over to the priests. So then you might ask, well, are we so sure that the priests who received those doves are going to for sure bring that offering? Maybe we should just wait until he's absolutely completed it. Why is it that we'll slaughter the Paschal lamb even when those bird offerings haven't been brought? Despite the fact that he bought them, he handed them over to the priest, maybe the purification process won't be complete. But with regard to the court of priests, right, the priests who are serving in the temple, we do rely on them. We do consider them to be basically infallible, that once they receive an offering to be brought on someone's behalf, they will take care of it. And this is in accordance with the teaching of Rav Shemaiah, who said that there is a presumption that the court of priests will not stand up from there, i.e. their place of meeting in the temple, until all the money in the collection boxes, which was placed there in order that the priest should use the money to bring offerings on the donor's behalf, is used up, right? So there's the specific offerings that people bring and hand over to the priests. But some people would just donate to the sort of communal offerings into these collection boxes around the temple when it was standing in Jerusalem. And the priests, it was their obligation to make sure that that money that was in those particular boxes to be used for communal offerings got used, that animals were purchased and they were offered up on the altar on behalf of the public, funded by the people who made donations to the temple in those particular collection boxes. Right, so until all the money in the collection boxes, which was placed there in order that the priest should use this money for these offerings, is used up. The priests ensure that any money they receive for offerings is used to purchase the offering and sacrifice it that same day. Certainly, if they were actually entrusted with an animal in order to sacrifice it, they would also do that on the same day. If we can presume that they're going to take the money from the collection boxes, purchase an animal, and bring it up as a sacrifice, then for sure we can assume that when they're actually handed animals to be offered up on the altar, that they would take care of that and they would not neglect their duty. The Gemara asks, and according to Rav, it would appear that by Torah law, one who is ritually impure due to contact with a creeping animal, a sheretz, is fit to have the Paschal lamb slaughtered on his behalf, and it is the sages who decreed that he is unfit out of concern that he will be negligent, right? So the one who he's touched the sheretz, but he hasn't immersed yet, unlike the cases of these other people who they need to be purified, but they've already immersed. And so we can assume, since all they're doing is waiting for the sun to set or for their offerings to be brought up on the altar, they are going to end up being tahor, ritually pure by nightfall, so we can slaughter the Paschal lamb on their behalf in the afternoon before that night. But with the one who touched the sheretz and hasn't immersed yet, by Torah law, we should slaughter the lamb on his behalf because it is absolutely available before him to become purified by that night. But it seems like the sages, the rabbis, decreed that we don't slaughter on behalf of that person until he has demonstrated he's going to take care of business by immersing in the mikvah. So by Torah law, we could slaughter, but the rabbis said, no, these people could be negligent. We're not going to slaughter on their behalf until they have immersed. If that is true, that by Torah law we could sacrifice the lamb on their behalf, but by rabbinic law we don't because they might be negligent. If so, why did Rav say with regard to a community that was half ritually pure and half impure? So that was last week. We were talking about because if the whole community, or at least the majority of the community, is tamei, then we don't make the whole community wait until the second Passover. Then we bring the offering even though the majority of the people are impure. That's an exception to the rule that impure people may not participate in the Korban Pesach. When more than half the community is tamei, we do bring it, even for a community that's impure. So that's like a population exception. But what we discussed was what happens if the whole community is split exactly half and half. What do? And back then, Rav said, okay, so we take one person and we make him impure. So now the majority is impure, and now we can all slaughter the Paschal lamb on behalf of everybody. We got to tip the balance over to impurity because it produces the better result that everyone can bring the offering and participate in it on Passover itself rather than wait till the second Passover. But the way that Rav said we make that person impure is that we bring him into contact with a sheretz. And actually, this kind of makes sense because now that we see that just being in contact with the sheretz, you can't assume that person's going to be pure by nightfall. And that's good in the case of now you want more, one more than half the population to be tamei. We shouldn't assume that person's going to be tahor by nightfall. But here the Gemara is saying, well, it seems like it's a contradiction. If so, why did Rav say with regard to community that he was ritually pure, that was half ritually pure and half impure? We contaminate one of them with a creeping animal so that the majority will be ritually impure, which will permit the entire community to offer the Paschal lamb in a state of ritual impurity. Why did Rav say that? Asked the Gemara on this page. If by Torah law, one who is ritually impure due to contact with a creeping animal is fit to have the offering brought on his behalf, how then can he tip the balance of the entire community such that the majority is considered ritually impure and unfit to bring the Paschal lamb in purity? Rather, according to Rav, by Torah law, he is also unfit to have an offering brought on his behalf. So it's not just that by Torah law we could bring it, by rabbinic law because they say people are negligent and we can't rely on them, we don't slaughter. According to Rav, it seems like actually by Torah law, we don't slaughter the lamb on behalf of one who has touched a sheretz but has not yet immersed in the mikvah. Where do we know that from? According to Rav, by Torah law, he is also fit to have an offering brought on his behalf, As it is written, this is Numbers 9, 10, and 11, if any man of you or your posterity shall be ritually impure due to a dead body, he shall offer the paschal lamb to he shall still offer the paschal lamb to the Lord. The 14th day of the second month they shall offer it. Are we not dealing with all who are ritually impure due to a dead body? And this includes one whose seventh day occurred on Passover Eve. If they sprinkle on him that day, he will immediately become ritually pure, which is the same situation as ritual impurity caused by a creeping animal. And nonetheless, the Torah states that he shall be deferred as he is considered unfit. Here we're discussing who gets deferred to the second Passover. And if you say, from where do we know that this is so, that the verse is referring to those who are able to become ritually pure by evening, perhaps it is referring specifically to one who is ritually impure from a corpse before the completion of his seventh-day purification process and will therefore not be ritually pure that evening. He holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak, who said, the ritually impure people in the desert who asked Moses what they should do concerning their obligation to bring a paschal lamb, they're the ones who led to Pesach Sheni being created, right? There wouldn't have been a Pesach Sheni if there weren't some people who had taken on the task of burying a dead body, a human body. They became ritually impure through contact with a corpse, a very strong kind of tumah. They went to Moses and they said, we are disqualified from eating the paschal lamb because we're tamei, but we want to participate. What should we do? Moses said, let me ask God. God said, for those people, Pesach Sheni, the second Passover a month from now. It is about them that the verses pertaining to the second Pesach were originally stated. They were ritually impure from a corpse that had no one to bury it. That's met mitzvah, the mitzvah of the corpse, mes mitzvah, right? And we also say that this is the chesed shel emes, right? This is the true kindness, and it is the obligation to participate in the true kindness. If there is a human body, and no one is taking care of it, it is such an important commandment to attend to the needs of the dead and to see to it that the person gets a suitable burial, an honorable burial, that even a Kohen, a priest, or a Nazir, one who takes a vow to abstain from the grape, which includes not coming near a dead body, so they are commanded not to touch a dead body unless it is like their parent. But if it's a total stranger, someone they've never met before, they don't even know who it is, but they're walking, out in nature and they see a dead body, now they have to attend to it, and they have to, even become ritually impure, even though they're a priest or even though they're a Nazir. They're commanded to do the commandment of true kindness and take care of the needs of the dead. That's the mitzvah shel emes. The chesed shel emes, the mitzvah of chesed shel emes, the commandment of the true kindness. So they were ritually impure, the ones the ones among the children of Israel at the time of the first Passover in the desert. Which was really the second Passover. The first one was the night before we left Egypt. So a year later, the first actual Passover being observed with the laws in the Torah that were given at Mount Sinai in the meantime. So they were ritually impure from a corpse that had no one to bury it. And their seventh day occurred on Erev Pesach. As it is stated, they could not perform the Paschal lamb on that day. Excuse me. They could not perform the Paschal lamb on that day. Numbers 9:6. By inference, it was only on that day that they were unable to perform it, but the next day they would have been able to perform it by completing their purification process. And nonetheless, the Torah said that they should be deferred, right? So what we see here is that even in the Torah, it distinguishes between types of tumah, right? Because we said one who's going to complete his purification process by that night, we slaughter the lamb on their behalf. Like one who, had a bodily discharge, immersed in the mikvah, they're going to be pure that night. So, okay, now we can slaughter the lamb for them. but one who attended to the needs of burying a dead body, who touching a corpse, you'd have to wait 7 days, be sprinkled with the special water of sprinkling that was made with water mixed with some ashes from the red heifer. And so sprinkle with that, which is tossed with some hyssop. On the 3rd and 7th days, then you immerse in the mikveh, then you have to wait for nightfall. So it could have been that they would have been, these people who took care of the dead body, they would have been pure by that night, but nevertheless, for that kind of tuma, of touching a dead human body, they'd get pushed off and still have to wait till the second Passover. And it sounds like what the Gemara is saying is that with respect to a sheretz, which is also a dead animal, in this case a dead creeping thing, that same idea is going to apply. I'm almost done. So if you have questions, put them in. And what I wanted to say here is a corpse that had no one to bury it. It is an important religious obligation to take part in the burial of the dead. If the deceased has no acquaintances or relatives to bury him, everyone is obligated to assist in his burial. The halacha is that a corpse with no one available to bury it acquires his place, i.e. the body must be interred where it was found. This is the case provided that it is an honorable location. Otherwise, the body must be buried in the nearest cemetery. This religious duty is so important that even priests and Nazirites who are ordinarily prohibited from coming into contact with a corpse may bury a deserted corpse if there is no one else available to do so. Likewise, the obligation to bury this corpse takes precedence over nearly all other religious obligations. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. Excuse me, let's go to comments and questions. Okay, Sharon says, Maimonides said that even the Amalekites, if they accept the Noahide laws, the command to obliterate them is relinquished. Just so. That was it. That's what we said. And Sharon said, if one who did touch the sheretz did immerse, does the same apply? It seems to me like we're not sure, right? Because on the one hand, the distinction that the Gemara made very strongly, very clearly, was the difference between one who's touched a sheretz and one, who had a discharge, was that the one who had a discharge has immersed. They have immersed. And so you would think that one who touched a sheretz and has immersed would then be in that same category. On the other hand, now the Gemara seems to be saying that it's a dead body. And so maybe one who touches a sheretz is going to be in that same group with a person who touches a human corpse, and we're not going to slaughter on their behalf, and they're going to be pushed off to Pesach Sheni. So the question is left open at this point in the discussion. And Tom Beck says, only a dead sheretz, not a live one. That's a really good question, Tom. I had that same question. I guess I never noticed during my first journey, my first 7.5-year journey through the Talmud. I thought if you touch the living sheretz, it's the same thing. It's just about that kind of creeping animal is what transmits the tumah. But as we saw that story, was it yesterday or the day before, where in the royal kitchen of the king and queen, they found a lizard. And so after preparing this beautiful, sumptuous royal banquet, and then all the food was about to come out, and then they found a lizard lying there on the kitchen floor, and it seemed like its tumah might have been imparted to everything. You might ask, well, why did the king and queen have to eat in a state of tahara? Let's just take that as a given for now. That's not the question we're talking about. But they felt like they were going to have to scrap the whole meal if indeed the kitchen had become tamei. So they asked the king what to do. He said, ask the queen. The queen said, ask Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel came and he said, how hot is the kitchen? He said, oh, it's super hot. He knows that lizards are cold-blooded animals, and in a very hot climate, they might just be totally still. So he said, pour some cold liquid on the lizard, see what happens. They poured some cold liquid on the lizard, and it moved. So he said, it's not dead. So if it's not dead, it doesn't transmit tumah. So therefore, we know for sure that the sheretz transmits tumah only when it's the corpse of a sheretz. And in fact, in the Koran Talmud, they make that clear when they're talking generally about sheretzim. Rav Steinsaltz's elucidation will include the words, the corpse of a sheretz. It doesn't always, but that is the way the law works based on that Rabban Gamliel story. You only get tamei from touching a sheretz if it's dead. And so now we made that clear as day. Now we got it. Hopefully we'll remember it. Okay, that's all the questions that Nina's passing over to me. I forgot to mention, we're having a big sale in our store, shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Use promo code AWESOME through the weekend for a 10% discount. You get a cool shirt like this, the Grateful Yid shirt. We got pillows, mugs, t-shirts, sweatshirts, long sleeve shirts, all kinds of really good stuff. They make great gifts. People are buying them. Make sure you participate while the sale price is on. Remember, promo code AWESOME. Have a great, great Shabbos, my holy sisters and brothers.